Welcome to the Morbid Codex, where true horror hides in the ordinary moments of life. Tonight, we bring you another 3 chilling tales from Singapore. They are haunting and they are unsettling in ways you least expect. These are Singapore true horror stories. Stay with us, if you dare. It was a typical Wednesday night. I was working late in my living room, trying to meet a deadline for work. The only light came from my laptop screen, casting a dim glow around the room. I was focused, typing away, when something caught my eye from my peripheral vision. It looked like someone was standing in the kitchen. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or I was just tired. But then I heard it. A faint, shuffling sound, like someone moving around in there. I paused, listening carefully. The kitchen was dark, and from where I sat, I could only see the outline of the doorway. I told myself it was nothing, probably the wind outside, or maybe the fridge making noise. But the sound persisted, growing a little louder. My heart started to race as I finally turned to look directly at the kitchen. That's when I saw her, a shadowy silhouette of an old woman standing in the kitchen. She wasn't moving, just standing there, hunched over, with her head down. The dim light from the hallway barely reached her, so I couldn't make out her face, but I could feel her presence. I froze, not knowing what to do. My mind raced. Was I hallucinating? Should I get up and check? But something told me not to move, not to acknowledge her. So I closed my eyes and started muttering a prayer under my breath, hoping she would disappear. After what felt like an eternity, I opened my eyes. The kitchen was empty. There was no old woman, no silhouette, no sound. I let out a shaky breath and tried to calm down, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. But the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of the old woman in the kitchen. I began to wonder if I had seen something real, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. It felt so vivid, so real, but there was no explanation. The next day, I mentioned it casually to a neighbor who had been living in that block for more than 10 years, only to find out that the previous owner of my flat was an elderly woman who had passed away alone in her kitchen. I haven't spoken of it since. National service was tough, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. I was serving at the Home Team Academy, training to be part of the Singapore police force. The days were long and exhausting, but the nights were worse. One particular night, after an especially grueling day, I collapsed onto my bunk, hoping for a good night's sleep. The barracks were quiet, with only the soft breathing of my fellow recruits filling the air. As I was drifting off, I felt a strange sensation. It was as though someone was watching me. I opened my eyes slightly and saw her, a woman standing at the far end of the bunk. She was just standing there, her figure barely visible in the dim light. My heart pounded, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to convince myself I was dreaming. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe I was imagining things. But then, the sound of footsteps echoed across the room. I opened my eyes again, and the woman was running toward me, her feet pounding against the floor. Before I could react, she was right in front of me, screaming directly into my ear. It was so loud and sudden that I screamed too, jolting upright. The other recruits shot up in their beds, looking around in confusion. But when I looked again, she was gone. There was no woman, no figure, nothing. My heart was racing, and I was too scared to go back to sleep. The other recruits thought I had just had a nightmare, but it felt far too real to be dismissed so easily. I tried to brush it off, but every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear her scream echoing in my head. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't explain it. A few weeks later, I overheard some of the senior guys talking about strange encounters in the camp. They mentioned sightings of a woman, though no one knew who she was or why she appeared. I never brought up my own experience, but the knowledge that I wasn't the only one who had seen her didn't bring me any comfort. Instead, it left me with more questions and a lingering sense of dread every time I stepped into that bunk. When I was a kid, my parents always warned me about playing outside after dark. Don't stay out past 7 p.m., they'd say, citing all kinds of superstitious reasons. Of course, like any 8-year-old, I didn't listen. I loved playing football with my neighbors under the void deck, and on one particular evening, we were having too much fun to stop. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the shadows were starting to stretch across the ground when I saw her. She was an old woman, hunched over, carrying a black cat. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just some old lady taking her pet for a walk, right? But then I noticed something strange. She wasn't walking with purpose. She was wandering aimlessly, her eyes downcast, the cat cradled in her arms. I nudged one of my friends and pointed her out, and we both watched as she moved closer, slowly, without looking up. When she finally did, I felt a chill run down my spine. Her eyes, they weren't right. They looked just like the cat's. Yellow, slitted pupils, cold and expressionless. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, staring at us. We all froze, unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, the cat hissed at us. We ran all the way back home, not daring to look back. After that night, I never stayed out past 7 p.m. again. My neighbors and I never talked about the woman or the cat, but we all knew what we had seen. It was as if there was an unspoken agreement between us. If we didn't talk about it, it couldn't be real. But deep down, we all knew better. That night had changed something, and we could never forget it. Years later, I was catching up with the same neighbors, and they brought up the old lady and the cat. One of them mentioned there was an old woman who used to live in the block next to ours. The woman was known for keeping to herself, only ever seen with her black cat. She disappeared one day, and no one ever found out what happened to her. The story sent chills down my spine, reminding me of that strange night. To this day, I wonder if we had seen something that shouldn't have been there, or someone who had never really left. These are the stories that make you question the line between reality and imagination. Whether it's a fleeting shadow or an unexplained encounter, sometimes it's better not to know. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to subscribe to the Morbid Codex for more terrifying tales.